So here's my third iteration of a LEGO Technic mechanical calculator. I think I'm probably not going to call this a success. It's not really precise enough. Compared to my last one, it's still got, I think, probably the same plus or minus 1 accuracy in any given digit, which isn't much good, though it does improve on it in a few other ways. So, it's got a lot of complicated controls, and I'll get into those next. So, this here is an on-off button for this battery, and then this here just is to reverse the motor. But it's kind of designed as a hybrid, so you can either crank it by hand or run it off the motor. I found in my testing that the motor usually doesn't have the torque and precision it needs, so I'm going to be hand cranking it, I think. So I split up that axle so the motor is actually not driven at all. But again, because I don't really consider it a complete model, I'm not going to bother taking it out. And maybe it is going to be useful, I don't know. But anyways, so we've got the crank with reset and run labeled for the two different directions it can go. We've got a plus minus selector here, which shifts the gearbox there. For resetting it, we've got this lever here that you have to move, and then you can rotate this that way to lock it in place while you work. And then we've got this lever here, which allows us to basically change the labels on it. So here we've got 9, 0, then 1 down. Where over here we've got just 9 down. So this is, if you're adding a number, most of the time it goes like this. If you're putting in a positive number. If you're putting in a negative number, it looks like this. Then the final one is kind of a hybrid control. We've got here and here to switch between inputting the first number and the second number. So if you flip it down here, it more or less moves it down here, but you kind of want to help it out anyways. Make sure it's engaged all the way. So those are the controls. Next I'll get into the theory behind it. So just like my previous calculators, the basic mechanism in here is this spiral. So if I push down this button here, we get an axle down here, and simultaneously engage these two driving rings. So then, whatever the input is, it'll be running the driving rings, and this will rotate, or this one here, until it hits, say, this axle. And then that is my number input. So then that comes out, there's two of them, so one of them is for the first number, and one is for the second number. So in that way, it's more like my original single-digit calculator than my second one. So anyways, after we do the first number, say it's this one, the top one, and then come down these 24-tooth gears into this differential, which is then geared up 2 to 1, because having this other side fixed makes it 2 times slower, this makes it 2 times faster. Then we continue going out. Then it runs through this differential without actually rotating it to turn this dial here. So that's the basic part of it. But we've also got that, repeated 4 times. There's 4 sets of buttons, 4 sets of 2 spirals, 4 of these differentials, and, well, only 3 of these because they're different, but, yeah, and 4 outputs. So, that is the basic principle behind it. I'll mention now, this function of the number 1, number 2 serves to lock up one side, because if, say, we were driving these top ones like before, when it comes in here, it can either rotate this axle and go to the dial, or it could rotate this one. And if this one is free, it quite possibly would do that. So I basically have to lock up one side at a time. So if I'm putting in the first number, I have to have the second number's side locked. So that's done. You can see some black 12-tooth gears down here. You can't really see that one, but it's there. So they slide back and forth on this linkage. So they engage with one side, disengage with the other. I'll actually show you down here, it's much easier to see. This side's actually a little different. Because of stuff involved with the stepper mechanism, I actually had to reverse the direction here. So instead of using the 24 to 24, I'm doing 16 to 8 to 16. But the principle is the same. So I've got 22 gears here instead of 12s. I slide them back and forth. It's sliding in the axle hole on that part there, so it's locked. So right now these gears cannot rotate, but these ones can. And if I move it back, these are locked, and these can rotate. Next, I think I'm going to try to explain the carrying mechanism, which is pretty complicated here, actually. So, in my past 4-digit one, I used a sautoir mechanism, which was pretty cool, but I found kind of finicky and annoying, just unreliable. This is probably unreliable too, but it's a different unreliable, so, well, it's not worth much. But anyways, it's using, or the basic principle, I started off having just using these 10-sided splat gears, so every time this did a full rotation, it would bump it one tooth. This is not one tooth because it's a different design. But then I realized that, what did I realize? Oh, that when it wasn't a differential at the time, it was a fixed gear. So the axle went back, it actually went all the way back to the spiral, and rotated that partly, which meant that when I added another number, it would already be one off, so it actually wouldn't carry at all. I mean, people who haven't thought about this as deep as I have may not understand that, but it was a problem having a fixed gear anyways. So, what I did is I built this custom differential based off of those. So now this basically moves it 1/2 tooth, which is a 20th of a rotation, but then because of the property of the differential, it speeds it up 2 times. So the output shaft actually moves 1/10 of a rotation, bumping this up, theoretically, at least one number, so from 1 to 0. But I also don't want this to be able to be back-driven when drive is coming through here. I want the drive to always go straight through and not move the carrier. So for that, I've got a fairly complicated mechanism. So down here, see, I've got this thing here that locks into the teeth on the gear. So this gearbox selector, normally it leaves it here and it's locked on that bar down there. But as this comes through, it pushes it up and then simultaneously bumps out a tooth. And as soon as it does that, this thing here pops down, goes between the teeth, and relocks it in that spot. Doesn't lock it as tight, but more or less, yeah. Then we've got the same thing down here to carry from the, what would that be? From the 10s to the 100s, and the same thing here, from the 100s to the 1000s, and then that's it for the carrying mechanism. So in a sec I'll try to show, I'll continue explaining first, then I'll show some examples. The next thing I want to describe is the series of gearboxes that work on this end of the gearbox to transfer drive from the crank to the spirals down here in the correct way. So there's 2 gearboxes. I'll start with this one here, the number 1, number 2. It's connected down to this driving ring here, which is a simple distribution style, so output down there, which then goes up there, and then from there to there, up, and then in, here. So that's for up and down. Pretty simple. And then, so I have it set up, so number 1 is always positive, so it always goes the same direction. It's the bottom one. So it just comes from there, and then just runs the few gears up to run this long string of gears that run all the driving rings on these. But then, the top half also has to have the ability to subtract. So I've got a second gearbox, which I showed up there, controlled by this, which is just a simple forward and reverse gearbox, which then feeds into the top ones, allowing them to rotate in either direction. Kind of connected with that gearbox is this thing here again, which I did mention before, so I'm just going to try to show why it's important. So, if it's right here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, this one here, it rotates down to about there, where this axle hits, and that's 1, if it's rotating the normal direction. But if it's rotating in reverse, if this one here were still 1, it wouldn't do -1, it would do more like -9 or something until it hit here. So that's not good. So when I flip the lever, now if I want to do -1, it turns out it's that one there. which is this here. So if it's rotating the opposite direction, it only moves a tiny bit, which turns out to be -1. So it basically just bumps everything down a bit, makes it so it still works. So then if we do this one, it turns out it would have been -8. So that's it there, and it then works out alright. Also, in order to get some more friction, so it didn't keep flopping back and forth, I geared this 24-tooth gear down to that 12-tooth gear on a friction pin. And just in case you're curious, this chain here is really not necessary. The only reason I have it there is because that 12-tooth gear is mounted on a very floppy pin that was not intended to be for gearing. But by this point, I added the gearing really late in the build process, and ripping this apart to put in a more firm mount for it sounded really annoying, so I just put this chain on, which wraps around that gear, doesn't actually drive it, but holds it close enough to the 24-tooth gear that they continue meshing. So that was just a funny little thing. And I think the final thing I gotta show here is the reset protocol. So if I've been playing with this thing, this here, right now it's in the 0 position, I'll move it up to, I don't know, some random position here. If I want to reset it, I don't want to imply, or I don't want to assume intelligence on the part of the user. Like, I want it to be something where you just kind of hit certain buttons and go until it stops idea. I don't want you to have to be, like, looking at the parts, even though you probably do have to in practice. But what you do then is you run the crank or the motor in the opposite direction, and you press these down one at a time to engage them. So then this one would rotate back until it hits this stop, which is based on this here. So stops it there, or on the other side it also stops it directly down. That's why it's an unusual stop. But the issue with that is that I can't rotate past 0, as you can see here. It's at 0, and I can only go positive. So 0 to 9 is open, but that's it. I can't go negative, which is okay down here because, as I mentioned, this is for my first number, and my first number is always positive. But on the top, it's a different story. This is actually a little broken, so I'll get back to you in a second. So as you can see, the top is a bit different. Whereas down here, this dark gray part is blocked by this other dark gray part. Up here, it's a black part, but it's just a bare axle up there. So it actually isn't blocked. And this can, I'll unlock it, but from the number 1, number 2 selector. So it can actually rotate indefinitely. It can rotate past the stop, and the stop doesn't do anything at all normally. So that would make it hard to reset, because you'd have to manually look at this and make sure that it's in the right spot. So what I have is that light gray part there can move. So I move this lever, and it pushes that there, which pushes this spring-loaded linkage here, which is hooked up to that light gray part with a rubber axle joiner. So when it's engaged, or then I also rotate this lock, which keeps it in place. So then it starts to work just like the other one, because the black part there is now limited. So you put that on while you're resetting it, getting it back to 0, and it works from either side, doesn't matter. And then you just disengage it, and you're ready to run again, either forwards or reverse. So, yeah. And it's the same idea for all 4. All the way down here, it's the same thing. Yeah, so that's it for resetting. So, as I mentioned at the start, this thing isn't really precise. Like, I don't think it's a successful model. It doesn't really work at the calculator like it's supposed to. So I don't think I'm going to demonstrate it by, like, punching in numbers and doing operations and showing you it getting correct answers, because I don't think it's going to. And trying to do it is a lot of work for me, filming it, and really probably isn't a very interesting video, because it just takes such a long time and is kind of repetitive. So the plan is I'm just going to first demonstrate punching in numbers the basic way, and then I'm going to show the special features, such as subtracting and carrying. But I'm probably not going to put it all together. I'll just make it relatively quick. First I'm going to try inputting some numbers. So down here we've all got these at basically 0. It's a little bit funny how it got synchronized, but anyways, synchronized right, it just looks funny. So pushing that down, and then I'll rotate the crank until that hits it. So running it, no, right, it's actually down on the bottom, so it'll be this one running until that hits. Okay, so that's that. If you look up here, it's right 4 basically. Again, there's slack. So I can try punching in another one. I'll make this one a 1. You can't really see it though, so I'm going to keep this to a minimum. Okay, and it appears that was not even able to conquer the backlash here. I'm going to try a bigger number. We'll just do a 7. Now, bother. Some other problems going on in there. It's just clicking. Can't get it to go. Oh, there we go. Not sure what was up there. Something was caught. Anyways, so now we got a 7 here. So that's all I'll show you for that basic part of it. Next I'll move on and show some basic subtracting. So for a subtracting operation, I start with this in the number 1 position. Then I'm going to input an 8 over here. So 8, run. It's a little caught there, so we'll give it a little bump. And that's that. So it's just between 8 and 9. We'll leave it there. Then I gotta switch to number 2. So locking the number 1 side, changing the distribution gearbox. And this is right now in adding mode, so I'll pull it up to shift into subtracting. Then I'll flip this over so I get the correct reading. So I'm going to try subtracting 6 from it. So 6 is this button here now. So I'll run that. Same direction. Gets a little caught there again for some reason. And there it is right there. Just about 2. So that worked pretty well. Next I'll move on and show some carrying. So in order to demonstrate carrying, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first punch in an 8 here in my units place, and then I'm going to switch to number 2, switch to adding, stick another 8 in here, and then we're going to see if my answer is, as it should be, 16. So, starting off, punch in, it's in number 1, it's in that, correct, so run, starts moving, gets a little caught in the usual spot for some reason, keep going, and it stops. It's, again, just between 8 and 9. Switch to number 2. Then bring this down into the adding mode. And interesting thing to see here is going to be that stepping that. So I'm going to see if I can do this one-handed. I probably can't. So what I'll try doing instead is that. That might be able to work. Or maybe not, I don't know. Okay. Yeah, maybe. So there we go. So it looks like that's about as far as I can crank it. So, flip this back up. You can see we got a 1 there, as we should, and this here seems to have gone too far, or too little. Not sure which. It's between the 8 and the 9. I think too far. But anyways, the thing to note is that this here popped from being here in the 0 position to being there in the 1 position. So, had a successful, or a semi. The carry was successful, other parts weren't. But anyway, that's the working principle of the whole thing. So by combining the subtracting, the adding, and the carrying through all 4 of those, it should allow you to do any adding and subtracting operation that is where the answer is less than 10,000 and more than -1, or 0 or greater. You can't have -0.5. That'd be silly. Anyways, yeah. So I was disappointed with the accuracy of this calculator in the end. I tried to cut down on, the stuff that makes for inaccuracy is basically everything after the spirals. So in my last calculator there, I had a freewheel mechanism, and I also had a park reverse. No, sorry, I'm confused. A drive/reverse gearbox to allow for adding and subtracting, as well as the carry mechanism. But the carry mechanism in that one didn't really have backlash. Whereas in mine, I've now got one set of gears here, or two sets in the case of that one, where it's 16, 8, 16. Then I've got inner bevel gears here, and that meshing. I think that would have been pretty good, pretty minimalistic. But then, when I had to add these custom differentials later on in the process to fix a different problem, adding this extra set of bevel gears, plus the slop in the carrier wiggling around, it did take its toll on the accuracy. So, I'm really not sure how much further I can develop this basic concept to try to get it to work well, based on like spirals like this and all that. But I do have a new idea that maybe I'll try building someday for a calculator based on linear motion rather than rotary motion, which could be more precise. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. One other thing that I should mention is you'll note right here, I've got these funny looking black parts. Try to free this up so I can move it and show you. Yeah, these here. So, what those are, they are 3D printed parts. I don't really consider it cheating though, because I'm only doing it because I don't have enough of these Lego toothed parts here for this design. So I could build it using entirely legitimate Lego parts in these spots, but I don't have the parts. So I 3D printed these parts at the same, I think, 22.5 degree angle, and put those on. So it works fine like that. Other times I used all Lego ones. I used pretty much all of mine up, maybe all of them. Might have one spare. Anyways, in case you noticed that and were wondering, that's what it is. But anyways, overall this calculator was a really fun project to work on, for the most part, and had some really fun eureka moments, especially with that down here. So it was a good project in that way. It didn't really work as well as I wanted it to, but at least I found out one other thing that doesn't work and had a fun time doing it. So this is Technivac 3.